The seat had been empty for 9 years, 2 months, and 19 days. The clerks of the Concord knew the count without checking. They carried it the way a person carries an old ache in a joint, something you stop noticing until the weather turns, and then it is all you can feel. The chair sat at the far curve of the great table, cut from pale stone, quarried on the moon of Ilinar, polished until it drank the light of the twin suns overhead and gave it back in slow amber waves. Every other place at that table was taken. Delegates of 41 species sat in their robes and their breathing rigs and their carapaces and their ceremonial cloth, and the chamber held the mingled scent of 41 kinds of living. The 42nd place had no scent at all. It had a nameplate. That plate had been remade twice across the years because the first 2 had dulled with dust, and it shamed the Concord to look at them. The one there now read, in the common script that every member could parse, Earth, Sol, System, Humanity. The letters were clean and exact. Someone shined that plate every morning. No one on the council had ever ordered it done. The cleaning staff had simply begun on their own, the way people quietly tend to the things they feel guilty about. High Warden Oren Kalath looked at the empty chair. He did it at the open of every session now. It had become a reflex, like testing a door twice to be sure of the latch. He was tall and gray as old ash, 4 fingers to each hand, his eyes a deep and unhurried amber. His people, the Sethari, had sat in the Concord for 4,000 years. They were patient by temperament, a species that reckoned in centuries the way shorter-lived peoples reckoned in seasons. Kalath was thought young for his post. He had lived only 388 years. "We will bring this session to order," he said. The delegates settled. Screens woke. Translation buds hummed low against 100 different ears and ear equivalents. The business of steering a small crowded corner of the galaxy was about to begin. But first, as always, someone glanced at the empty chair. They could not help it. It drew the eye the way a gap draws the tongue after a tooth is gone. 9 years back, the invitation had gone out. It had not been the first. It had, in fact, been the 7th. The Concord had watched Earth a long time. They had watched since the humans first split the atom, since they first threw their signals blind into the dark, since they first taught their machines to think. Each of those steps had gone into a file. Discussions had opened and closed. The steady conclusion, repeated across generations of quiet observation, was that humans were interesting and almost certainly not ready. Then the humans had done a thing no one had modeled. They built a ship that could fold the distance between stars. Not a crawler, not a sleeper hauling frozen colonists across a century of nothing, but a real ship, a fast one, a ship that bent the rules of space, the way a clever child bends the rules of a game. Everyone else plays straight. They had worked it out in less than 100 years of serious effort. The Sethari had needed 800 years to solve the same puzzle. The Ilme had needed 600. The Draub had never cracked it alone at all, and had taken the method as a gift after they joined. Humans had done it in under a century, and they had done it with no one's help. So the 7th invitation had gone out, and it had been different from the 6 before it. Not a signal, not a probe, not a coded ladder of prime numbers. A ship, a real Concord vessel, crewed by 4 species, carrying a letter written by hand in 17 tongues, 3 of them human. The ship came to Earth's orbit and waited politely as it had been told to. Inside 2 days, a human craft rose to meet it. The talks began well enough. The humans were curious and open and careful in the guarded way of people who have been surprised before and would rather not be surprised again. They asked sharp questions. They listened to the answers. They were not moved by the Concord's size or age or long history, which some of the delegation found refreshing and others found faintly insulting. Then the moment came that changed everything. The lead human, an envoy named Nell Harrow from a cold and northern country the size of an inland sea, asked one plain thing. She asked what part Earth would actually play. What would humanity's voice weigh? Which choices could they make, and which would be made for them? The delegation explained with great care and no small gentleness that new members began in the watching tier. They would hold a seat. They could speak. They could offer suggestions. But for the first 100 years they would carry no binding vote. This was the way it was done. This was how every new people had begun. It was a season of learning, of settling in, of earning trust. Harrow had gone quiet a moment. Then she had said, "So you'd like us to sit at your table, keep your rules, and hold no real power for 100 years?" And the delegation had said, in effect, yes. She had looked at her people. They had looked back at her. Something moved between them that was not words, but the plain understanding of those who know each other well. "We'll think about it," she said. They thought about it for 6 months. The answer came back through the same channel, courteous, precise, and final in the way that only truly final things are final. Earth declined, not because humanity was too young, the message said, and not because it was too crude, but because it would not sit without a voice. Humanity was not unwilling to cooperate. It was deeply willing. But cooperation meant both sides brought something real, and both sides gained something real. 100 years of watching was not cooperation. It was a waiting room. When they were ready to speak as equals, the message said, humanity would be glad to talk again. The Concord had been stunned, then annoyed, then, over the long turning of years, quietly fascinated. The seat was left empty. Just in case. Calath had been a junior delegate the day the refusal was read aloud in this chamber. He still remembered the silence that followed it. Not an embarrassed silence, and not an angry one. A thinking one. The kind that arrives when something surprises you in a way that makes you go back and check your own foundations. He had been going back and checking, off and on, for 9 years. The thing that stayed with him was never the refusal. It was the reason underneath it. We will not be present without being real. He had spent 380 years inside this system. He knew, in the tired and practical way of an old administrator, what the watching tier truly looked like from the inside. Second class in everything but the wording. 100-year hold set down long ago by founding peoples who wanted to be sure. No newcomer could unsettle the order before the order had time to absorb them. A rule 3 centuries past its last honest review. He had never once said this out loud. He was thinking it now because of what lay on the table in front of him. It had come in overnight from the border reaches, from the ragged edge of Concord space where the clean maps ended and the honest ones admitted they did not know what lay beyond. For most of the Concord's history, the border had been a quiet place. Things stirred out there, yes. Odd signals surfaced, now and then. Ships sent to look sometimes did not return. But there had never been a coordinated threat. Nothing organized. Nothing that demanded the whole attention of the Bastion fleet. The report in his hand said that was ending. The thing that had filed it was a deep-range sensor post, crewed by a skeleton team of 3, out past the last reliable star. It had found something large, moving in the dark, beyond the border. Not one large thing, many large things, moving together, moving inward, moving toward the settled heart of Concord space. The crew had called it a formation, because that was the only word that fit. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose, with order, with the steady, grinding patience that has only one honest name. A fleet. Calath set the report down. He looked at the empty chair again. He told himself it was only fatigue. He was old, and the hour was late, and the mind reaches for old habits when it is tired. But he did not look away for a long time. And when at last he did, he found he had already begun to work a piece of arithmetic he did not want to finish. The one that turned a distance and a speed into a number of months. And the number of months was far, far smaller than it had any right to be. The post that had sent the report was called Waystation Corin, and the being who noticed it first was a named Delin Ovar. Ovar was Ilme, blue-skinned and wide of eye, and 60 years old, which, for an Ilme, was neither young nor old, but the settled middle, where a person stops trying to become something and simply becomes good at what they already are. He had been at Corin for 11 years. He kept a small hydroponic garden in a spare bay off the sensor deck. 6 trays of pale green things that were not quite vegetables and not quite flowers, but that his bond partner back home had asked him to grow. So he grew them. He drank a bitter root tea that nobody else on the station could stand. He had a habit of setting the cup down on the edge of the sensor console and forgetting it, so that half the time when he sat down to his shift, there was already a cup there, cold, waiting for him. He was not looking for anything the night he found it. Nobody at Corin looked for anything. The border arrays were old, and the budget was thin, and the work was the kind of work that dulls the edge of your attention, until a person can go a whole rotation and never once sit up straight. Ovar sat up straight. There was a smear on the deep return that should not have been there. He cleaned the feed, and it stayed. He ran it against the archive of known bodies, and it matched nothing. He widened the aperture, and the smear did not shrink into an artifact, the way artifacts do when you look at them harder. It grew. It resolved. It became edges, and the edges became shapes, and the shapes moved together in a way that made the small hairs along his arms lift on their own. He filed the alert. Then he sat back and reached for the cup at the edge of the console, and found it cold and drank it anyway, because his hands wanted something to do. 2 systems away, a very old man was on his knees in the dirt. Nell Harrow was 58 now, and she had not been an envoy for 4 years. She lived high on the northern slopes where the air smelled of resin and cold stone, in a house with a low roof and a stubborn wood stove, and she grew things with her hands because after a life spent moving words around a table, it was a relief to move something that answered honestly. That morning she was pulling the last of the autumn roots, the sky above her a pale washed blue, her dog asleep against the garden gate, some small bird arguing with another small bird in the branches over her head. It was the kind of morning that convinces a person the world is a simple place, and most trouble can be solved by going outside and using your back. Her granddaughter was 6 and visited on the weekends. The girl was named Junie, and she asked questions the way water runs downhill, without effort and without stopping. That Saturday she had tipped her head back at the sky and said, "Gran, is it true the Star People wanted us in their club?" "They did," Harrow said. "Why didn't we go?" Harrow sat back on her heels and thought about how to answer that for a 6-year-old. She thought about a chamber she had never seen, and a table she had never sat at, and a vote she had never cast. She thought about the faces of the delegation when she asked her one plain question. That patient, practiced calm, the calm of people who expect to be obeyed and are honestly puzzled when they are not. "Because they wanted us to sit quiet for 100 years first," she said. Junie considered this with the whole of her small, serious face. "That's a really long time." "It is." "Would they have listened after?" "Maybe," Harrow said. "Maybe not. We didn't want to find out that way." The girl nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the sky. "I think you did the right thing," she said. Harrow smiled. "I hope so, love." She did not know yet that a cup of cold tea, 2 systems away, had already changed the shape of the rest of her life. Back in the chamber, the arithmetic would not leave Calath alone. He ran it slow, then fast, then a 3rd time, because he did not want to trust the answer. The formation was moving at a speed his instruments could measure, and his mind could not quite accept. Whatever it was quick. Not as quick as the newer human ships, if the reports on those could be believed, but quick enough that the math kept landing on the same cold place. At its present course and pace, the thing in the dark would reach the inhabited inner systems in a little under 19 months. 19 months was not long. 19 months was nowhere near long enough. He should have taken it to the full council. That was the procedure. Convene, present, deliberate, and let 41 considered voices grind the matter down into a policy over the course of a season. He had followed that procedure for 300 years, and most of the time the slowness of it was a virtue. Old civilizations make fewer mistakes because they move slowly enough to see them coming. But the thing in the dock was not moving slowly, and Calath, sitting alone in the emptying chamber with the border report in his hands, understood with sudden and uncomfortable clarity that the procedure he had trusted his whole life was, in this one case, a way of running out of time with great dignity. He reached for his communicator. His aide, a young Sethari of only 60 years, who was very efficient and very literal, answered at once. "I need the contact protocols for the Sol system," Calath said. There was a pause. "Warden, those protocols are on file, but I should tell you they have not been touched since the invitation was declined." Earth may have changed how they receive contact entirely. Find whatever still works. Yes, Warden. Another pause, more careful. May I ask the purpose of the contact? Kalath looked at the nameplate on the empty chair. Earth, Sol System, Humanity. The letters caught the last of the failing light. We need to talk to them, he said. The aide waited. Something is coming, Kalath said. Something I do not think we can handle alone.
And I want to speak with whoever it was that said no to us 9 years ago, if that person is still alive.
I will find out. Kalath rose. The chamber was nearly dark now, the twin suns gone behind cloud beyond the high windows. He walked to the door, and at the threshold he stopped and turned back, the way he always did, the way he had never been able to stop himself from doing. The chair was still empty, but for the first time in 9 years, looking at it did not feel like looking at a wound. It felt like looking at a door he had not yet found the courage to open. He opened the channel that night, and somewhere on a northern slope, a communicator that mostly gathered dust began quietly to ring. The message reached her on a Tuesday. She was in the garden again, hands in the soil to the wrist, when the little device on her belt buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed a second time. She ignored that too. It buzzed a third time, and the tone had changed. One long, low note that meant a thing had been marked urgent by someone who did not use that word lightly. She sat back, peeled off a glove, and read. The note was from the Office of Extrasolar Contact, a small and mostly idle government room in the city of Halvard, that had been created after first contact, and had spent the years since finding very little to do. It said that an urgent contact request had come in from the Concord by Deep Space Relay, and that they were asking for Nell Harrow by name, and please advise. She read it twice. Then she sat there in the dirt, with a root in one hand and the device in the other, and looked up at the pale washed sky. Took you long enough, she said. The call itself came through 2 days later, once the channel was secure and the translation systems had been made to agree with each other. It was the equivalent of a face, a shimmer of light that resolved in the plain little room in Halvard into the image of High Warden Kalath, who looked exactly like the pictures she had studied years ago, only a little older and a great deal more tired. They observed the small rituals, confirmed the translation held, adjusted for the delay in the light, established that this was a first conversation and not yet a negotiation. Then, Kalath said, "Envoy Harrow, I would like to be direct with you." "Please," she said. "The Concord is facing something it did not foresee and is not prepared to meet. A fleet is moving through the deep border. We do not know its origin. We do not know what it is made of. We do not know what it wants. Our best figure says it reaches the inner systems in roughly 19 months. The Bastion fleet is the strongest force in this arm of the galaxy. Our own analysts are not certain it is enough." Harrow was quiet a moment. "What do you want from Earth?" "A conversation," Kalath said. "Not an invitation. Not an arrangement where Earth sits quiet for 100 years and earns our trust. A real conversation.
About what is coming, about what we know and what we do not, and about whether humanity has any interest at all in what becomes of the rest of us."
She studied him. He was hard to read. The amber eyes, the gray stillness she supposed came with 4 centuries of living. But there was a tension in the set of his shoulders that she recognized. Across the whole distance between 2 species, worry looked the same. "Tell me everything you know about the fleet," she said. It was not much. The formation had first tripped the border arrays some 18 months earlier and had been written off as a fault. The arrays were old and thinly crewed, and the crews were bored, and a smear on a deep return is the sort of thing a bored person is glad to call a glitch. When the same alert came a second time and then a third, someone had finally looked at it with both eyes. What they found was a formation of, they estimated, roughly 350 vessels. The word roughly did a great deal of work in that sentence. The arrays could not see clearly at that range, and the fleet moved in a way that made counting hard, spreading and closing, expanding and drawing in, like something slowly breathing. The analysts argued over whether the number was too high or too low. Most of them thought it was too low. The ships were large. That much was certain. Each one read bigger than a standard Concord warship. They held a single constant speed and gave off none of the drive signatures Concord vessels produced, which meant either they used some kind of engine no one had seen or they were far better at hiding their output than anything the Concord had ever met. And they had answered nothing. The Concord had tried on every frequency it knew and several it had invented for the occasion. 47 times in all. Nothing came back. Not refusal. Not jamming. Not static. Just silence. The silence, one analyst had written, was the part that frightened him most.
Because there are only so many reasons a thing does not answer when you call it.
It does not hear you. It does not understand you. It does not think you are worth a reply. Or it has already decided what it is going to do, and talking would only cost it time. Of those four, the last was the one nobody wanted to name, and everyone kept naming anyway. The first flex was small, and it was Harrow who made it. And she made it without raising her voice. She had listened to all of it. And then she had begun to ask questions. Had the fleet been holding a constant speed or had it been building? Were the gaps between the ships even, or did they vary? Had any of their sensor passes caught the formation from directly above or below, rather than side on? To the last question, the answer was no. And Harrow said plainly that this was something they should fix at once. Kalath asked why. Because a fleet seen from the side can look like almost anything, she said. A fleet seen from above tells you how it's arranged. And how a thing is arranged tells you how it thinks. She let that sit. In war, the formation is the grammar. If you can read the formation, you can read the enemy's mind. There was a silence on the Concord end that had nothing to do with the light delay. Later, when Kalath carried her words back to the full council, it was that one word the delegates fixed on. She used the word war, said Delegate Izel of the Ilme, softly. The Ilme were a gentle people, gentle for so long they had half forgotten what harshness felt like. She did, Kalath said. Was she being dramatic? No, Kalath said. She was being exact. Humans have a very long history with the word. She did not reach for it. She simply named the thing in front of us with the correct name and waited to see if we could bear to hear it. Delegate Vor of the Draub, a large armored being who chose each word as though it were the last one he would be permitted, said, "You opened contact with Earth without a vote of this body." "I did. That is outside procedure." "It is," Kalath said. "The situation is also outside procedure. I am not asking your forgiveness. I am telling you it has happened and asking whether you will stand with me in continuing it or whether you would prefer to meet what is coming with our procedures intact and our numbers short." The chamber was quiet for a long time, and in that quiet, more than one delegate looked out of an old and guilty habit at the empty chair and found that for the first time it was not looking back at them as a reproach. It was looking back as a question. And the question was very large and very close, and it would not wait for a season of deliberation to be answered. On Earth, meanwhile, the news was already loose. It had gotten loose the way news always does, not through any announcement, but because a secure channel of that kind took 17 technical teams across 3 countries to build, and 17 teams meant 17 groups of people who each had someone they trusted and went home to. Inside 2 days it was everywhere, and as it spread it lost its edges, the way a story does. The complicated parts fell away. The simple, dramatic parts remained. What most people understood came down to this. The Concord had called. They needed help. Something was coming out of the dark. The public naturally had opinions. Some were angry. These pointed out that the Concord had treated humanity like a child, offered it a seat with no power, and now, the first time trouble arrived, expected humanity to come running to save the day. Some were thrilled. These pointed out that this was exactly the moment Earth had spent 9 years quietly preparing for, whether it had known it or not, and that, declining the invitation, had turned out to be the wisest move of the century, because now humanity could walk in as a partner, rather than as an apprentice, waiting 100 years for the right to speak. And a smaller, quieter group of people were simply afraid. They had read the numbers, the size, the silence, the steady inward crawl, And they understood in the cold, clear way that understanding arrives in quiet rooms that whatever was coming did not care about anyone's politics. It was coming the way winter comes, without asking, without stopping, because that was what it did. That smaller, quieter group turned out to be the ones who were closest to right. The man who would command Earth's ships came into it sideways through the data. Admiral Marcus Vane had run Earth's interstellar defense for 3 years. He was 63, broad across the shoulders, his hair gone white and cut close, his face the kind that looked carved out of something that did not give. He had spent 40 years in space, first as a pilot, then as a commander, then as the sort of person who sat in rooms with very serious people and made very serious choices. He had a habit which he considered a discipline and others considered unnerving, of saying the worst thing out loud in a flat and level voice, on the theory that people make better decisions when they can see clearly what the bad outcome looks like. He sat in the temporary office they had given Harrow and Halvard, and looked at the fleet data spread across the table. "You asked them for overhead passes," he said. "I asked them to try," Harrow said. "They've got nothing positioned above the fleet's line. They're moving 2 arrays to cover it. About a week." Vane nodded, but he was already looking at something else. The spacing. The blurred, incomplete image of the formation that was the best the old border arrays could give. Something in it had been nagging him since he first saw it. "This spacing," he said, "between the ships. What about it? It's too even." She looked at him. "Living fleets don't hold spacing like this," he said. "They drift." Correct. Even with the best computers in the loop, there's always a little variation, because there's always a person somewhere in the chain who blinks. This pattern doesn't blink. He tapped the image. "This is machine spacing. Whatever's setting this formation is doing it as arithmetic, not as judgment." Harrow was quiet. "You think it's automated? I think it's possible. Or I think whatever's steering it thinks so differently from us that the difference doesn't matter. Either way, it changes the shape of the problem." He leaned back. "If it's alive, if there are minds on those ships making calls, then it can be surprised, confused, worn down, talked to. If it's a program." He paused. "You can't talk a program out of anything. You can only stop it or let it finish." She turned that over. Outside the window, Halvard was gray and ordinary. Traffic moving, people walking, the whole daily machinery of a world that had no idea what was being said in this small room. "We need to talk to the council again," she said. "Agreed. But before we do, we decide what we're willing to put on the table. Because they're going to ask. They are. And what will you say?" Harrow looked out at the gray a moment. "The same thing I said 9 years ago. That we're willing to help. That we're willing to stand alongside them, but not on their terms. On terms that are fair." Vane almost smiled. "Think they'll take it?" "I think they don't have a choice," she said. "And I think this time they know it." They met in person on a cold morning in the deep of the year. The Concord sent 3 ships, not the ceremonial kind that had come 9 years before. All polished plate and formal marking, but working vessels that wore the honest scars of use. They held at a courteous distance, while Earth's traffic control cleared their approach, and the clearance took a little under 4 minutes. On the Concord's own worlds, a member vessel arriving at port faced a much longer process layered with documents and checks and the deep bureaucratic slowness that gathers around anything built to shepherd thousands of ships from dozens of species. 4 minutes was fast. The Concord pilot who caught the clearance noted it in her log and said nothing to her crew. But she thought about it for a while. They came down in a shuttle that Earth's ground crew brought in smooth and parked at a terminal built 9 years earlier for Concord vessels and used in the years since, mostly for storage. Someone had cleaned it out and painted it. The smell of fresh paint still hung in the cold air when Calath stepped onto the pad and looked up at a low gray winter sky. His first breath of Earth air stopped him where he stood. It was cold and wet and thick, crowded with the complexity of a living world, soil and water and the exhaust of a technological people, and, under all of it, something older and greener he had no name for. His own kind breathed a thinner air. Earth's came at him like a wall. He breathed through it, gathered himself, and walked forward. Harrow waited at the edge of the pad in a plain coat and sensible boots, Vane at her shoulder, and behind them a small cluster of people, who all had the look of running on determination and coffee. She was older than her file, but she stood exactly as she had 9 years before, straight, easy, holding the particular stillness of a person who knows what they think and is in no hurry to perform it. She put out her hand. Calath had been briefed on the gesture. He took it. Her grip was brief and firm. "Warden," she said. "Envoy, I am grateful you agreed to meet in person." "I always preferred it face-to-face," she said. "Come inside. It's cold." They met for 3 days, and not in any government hall, but in a converted conference center on the edge of the city, the kind of place that usually hosted corporate retreats. Someone had fitted it with translation gear and decent light, and enough table for everyone to spread their data. There were, notably, no flags. Harrow had asked for them to be taken down. She said flags made people feel they were speaking for something other than themselves, and in her experience, the moment a person began speaking for something other than themselves was the moment they stopped being honest. Calath found this either very wise or very strange, possibly both. On the first day they shared what they had, and they held nothing back, which surprised the humans, who had braced for the usual slow diplomatic dance of partial disclosure. The Concord simply put everything on the table at once. The blurred images, the analysis, the border reports, the 47 silent calls. "We don't have time for the careful version," Calath said, when Harrow remarked on it. "Whatever is coming will reach our worlds before careful is finished." Then Earth showed its own hand, and it held things the Concord had not known existed. A net of deep space sensor buoys seated quietly along the outer rim of the Sol system over the past several years, an early warning line built on the plain principle that it is better to see trouble coming from far off than to meet it up close. Drive technology that gave human ships a real speed advantage over the Concord standard. And, most of all, a recording. 3 years earlier, one of Earth's survey ships had been out in the deep border, not in the same reach as the incoming fleet, but not far from it, and had caught something strange. A brief transmission, no more than 4 seconds, in a signal format that matched nothing in the Concord's archives or Earth's own. The ship's mind had flagged it and kept it. No one had ever cracked it. But they had it. When they played it, the room went quiet in a specific way. The quiet of many different people arriving at the same thought in the same instant. One of the Concord's own signal analysts leaned forward and said, very carefully, "We received something like this 18 months ago, from the direction of the fleet." "You're sure?" Vane said. "Not the same message, the same structure underneath it." They put the 2 signals side by side. The surface shapes were different, but the pattern beneath was the same. The way 2 different sentences, spoken aloud in one language, carry different sounds and the same grammar. "It's the same tongue," the analyst said. "Then whoever is out there," Harrow said slowly, "was already here. 3 years ago, close enough to this system to send something. Scouting, maybe," Vane said. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe something else." She looked at Calath. "This changes the clock. They didn't just appear at your border. They've been moving for at least 3 years. Watching, mapping. And whatever they found in that time is what turned the formation inward." Calath absorbed it. "You think something triggered it?" "I think something they saw made them decide to move," she said. "Whether that's a threat or a test or just a conclusion, we don't know yet. But they aren't random. They're deliberate." On the second day they argued. Not personally. No one shouted. No one walked out. But the disagreements were real and heavy, and they sat in the space between every sentence. The Concord needed Earth. Plainly. Needed the faster ships and the willingness to go where Concord vessels flinched. But the Concord also needed the whole thing to happen, inside some kind of framework. An improvised partnership with a non-member had no precedent. It raised questions about who commanded whom, about accountability, about what would happen afterward, if there was an afterward. "We are not asking you to join," Calath said. "We understand,"
That is not what Earth wants on the terms we can offer. But we need some arrangement. Something that sets out roles and responsibilities.
Harrow listened, and then she said, "You want us to fight beside you without being members, but with a paper that says we agreed to it." "Roughly, yes. And after, if we help and it works, what does Earth get?" There was a pause. This was the question. The Concord's own legal minds had been circling for 2 weeks.
What do you offer a people that has already refused everything you thought you had to give?
"Anything short of full standing at that table is not acceptable to us," Harrow said, before Calath could answer. "Not deference, not a junior partnership, not a new coat of paint on the watching tier. If we fight as equals. If we spend our people's lives beside yours, our people's lives carry the same weight. And when it is over, we come to whatever comes next as full partners." Full voice, full vote, at once. The room went very still. One of the Concord delegates, an old and small being of the Vess who had not spoken in 2 days, said softly, "That is not how membership works." "No," Harrow said, "it isn't. But this is not how membership has ever been offered, either. You are not inviting us to a table to watch. You are asking us to bleed. That is a different thing, and you know it is." The Vess said nothing more. Calath said, "If the Council agrees to full partnership in exchange for Earth's ships and Earth's technology, will you commit?" "I'll carry it to my government and recommend it," Harrow said.
"I can't promise past that."
"But yes, if the terms are right, I believe Earth says yes." On the 3rd day, Vane stood in front of a projection and told them what he thought was actually out there. He had spent the 2 evenings after the formal sessions working through the data with Earth's analysts. Not just the images, but the motion, the signal, the mathematical fingerprint of the formation that had nagged him from the start. He was now fairly sure it was not a living fleet. "Living fleets adjust," he said. "The minds running them react. They change shape around obstacles and threats and openings. There's an organic looseness to the movement, and you can see it in the data, even from a long way off. This formation doesn't have it. It moves with what I'd call algorithmic precision. The spacing doesn't change. The speed doesn't waver. When the records show it turning, the whole thing turns at once, together. Not the way a fleet turns as an order passes down a chain of command, but the way a single program runs a single instruction." He let that settle. "We are not facing an enemy with a strategy," he said. "We are facing a program with an objective, and the difference matters because a strategy can be countered, outthought, worn down. A program cannot. A program keeps running until it is stopped, or until it is done." "What is its objective?" Calath asked. "I don't know," Vane said, "but I have a guess." He changed the projection. The fleet's path drew itself across the star map as a single line through the border, through the outer territories, and on inward. He extended it. It did not stop at any fortress world or resource cluster or contested edge. It ran clean to the center of Concord space, to the old cluster where the founding peoples lived, to the heart of everything. "It isn't coming to fight," Vane said. "It's coming to erase." The room did not move. He looked around at the faces, human and other, all of them wearing the same expression now, the expression of people who have just understood that the thing coming toward them has no interest in a conversation. "We have to stop it before it's close enough to do what it came to do," he said, "not slow it at the border." "Stop it! Because if we only slow it, it recalculates and keeps coming." "How?" Calath said. Vane looked at him. "That's what I want the next 72 hours to answer. Your analysts and mine. Together." Calath was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "Yes." And in that room, for the first time, the word did not sound like diplomacy. It sounded like 2 people standing at one window, looking out at the same dark thing, and deciding, together and as equals, that they would meet it. The vote came on a day the humans would have called a Thursday. It was not unanimous. 7 delegates stood against it, citing procedure and precedent and the door it would open. Calath had expected them. He had spoken with each one beforehand, not to change a mind so much as to be sure each mind understood what it was choosing. He had said, in the careful way of a very old diplomat, "You have every right to vote against this. Your concerns are not foolish, but I need you to understand, plainly, what a no means in this hour. It means we meet what is coming without Earth. I need you to know that, and choose it on purpose." 2 of the 7 changed. The other 5 did not. The measure carried, 34-7. When Calath sent the result to Halvard, Harrow read it, sat still for a moment, and passed it on to her government. The answer came back in 4 hours. Earth was in. And then the clock got worse. The fleet was accelerating. Not a surge, not a leap to full power, but a slow and steady climb. The kind that happens when a program reaches the point in its schedule where it is meant to move faster. The estimate, revised twice in 3 days, dropped from 19 months to 14. 14 months was not 19. 14 months was, in the plain cold speech of arithmetic, a great deal less. The plan took 6 weeks to build, in 3 places at once, in Halvard, on Sethar Prime, and aboard a deep station called Way Station Corin, at the edge of the Sol system, tied together by a communication net that Earth's engineers had strung, and that ran a good deal faster than the Concord's own relay, a fact the Concord's technicians noticed the moment they plugged into it and did not entirely enjoy. What they knew by the end of the first week was hard. The fleet was real and large, and Vane had been right about the rest. Every scrap of data they could gather, and they were gathering it fast now with Concord range ships repositioned for proper coverage and 3 of Earth's long probes threading the dark at speeds the Concord ships could not match, said the same thing. The fleet moved and responded in ways no living commander would produce. It was a machine, almost certainly automated, almost certainly running a program set in motion a very long time ago. By whom? Nobody could say. That was the part that kept the analysts awake. The Concord had records reaching back 4,000 years, across contact with more than 60 peoples. In all of that, nothing like this had ever been logged. No machine fleet, no automated armada crawling through the dark with a purpose, and no pilot. Which means, said Dr. Priya Anand, Earth's lead on the signal. A small, sharp-eyed woman who had spent 30 years reading patterns out of deep space. It predates your active observation. Whatever built this is older than anyone at that table. Or it comes from somewhere you never thought to look, Vane said. That too, she said. Origin mattered for one reason above all. If you knew who had built a thing, you might know how to stop it. A program has a purpose. A purpose has a structure. A structure has a weakness, if you know where to look. But finding the weak seam of a machine built by an unknown people on unknown principles was the kind of problem that could take longer than the months they had, which they no longer had anyway. And into that gap, Delin Ovar returned to the story. Though he would never know it, the human cost when it came wore his face because they had let it. In the weeks after his alert, someone in the Joint Command had pulled his file to thank the crew of Corin, and the file had a small photograph, and the photograph had a blue-skinned man of 60, standing next to 6 trays of pale green things with an expression of mild embarrassment, as though he had not expected anyone to look. The command sent the crew a message of thanks. Ovar wrote back a short, formal, faintly awkward reply, and mentioned, because he was proud of it, that the pale green things had finally flowered. The fleet reached Way Station Corin 4 days later. It did not slow for the station. It did not target it in the sense of choosing it. It simply passed through the volume of space the station occupied, and the station was in the way, and the program did not distinguish between an obstacle and an enemy and a small blue man's garden. Corin went off the net between one sensor sweep and the next. There was no distress call. There was not time for one. When a Concord range ship reached the position, 11 hours later, there was nothing to recover that was larger than a hand, and drifting among it, the analysts noted in the flat language of such reports, were fragments of 6 shallow-growing trays and the components of a small ceramic cup. The command did not release the photograph, But the people who had seen it did not forget it. And Vane, who had spent 40 years saying the worst thing out loud in a level voice, found when he tried to brief the loss that his voice was not quite level, and he stopped and let the silence carry the part he could not. Then he went back to work, because that was the only thing the dead were owed that the living could still pay. Earth's part of the joint force came to 12 ships. 12 sounded absurd against a fleet estimated well past 300. Vane had been asked about it, bluntly, by the Bastion fleet's commander, a Cathari general named Wren, who was calm and professional, and had been doing this long enough to distrust surprises. He had answered that size was not the measure that mattered here. "Speed," he said, "maneuver, and these." He showed her the schematics for what Earth called a null emitter, a technology grown over the past 4 years, first meant for breaking up debris fields and drifting rock that threatened colony ships. A null emitter through a local field that fouled drive systems. It did not destroy them. It made them stutter, made them pause, made them lose the clean execution any complex machine relies on. Against a living crew, it would be an irritation. Briefly, disabling and no more. Against an automated fleet, one that leaned on the exact mathematical running of its own program to hold formation and hold purpose, it would be, Vane said, like throwing static into a signal. The program would not stop, but it would have to recalculate. And while it recalculated, it would be open. Wren looked at the schematics a long moment, quiet in the way of soldiers measuring a thing rather than admiring it. "How long does the recalculation last?" "We don't know," Vane said. "It depends on the program's depth. Our model says somewhere between 3 minutes and 12. That's a wide window." "It is. That's why we need your fleet already in position when we open it. Because the window closes, and we have to be moving the instant it opens." Wren studied him. "You're asking us to hold the strike in place, while your 12 go in first and make the opening?" "Yes. And if the emitters don't work, your fleet is still whole, at full strength, and you've spent 12 ships to learn something you needed to know." There was a silence. "You're very direct," Wren said. "An old habit," Vane said. "I've found people choose better when they've seen the bad outcome clearly." Wren almost smiled. "We will be in position," she said. The 6 weeks ended and the doing began. Earth's 12 ships were named Task Force Aegis. Vane flew his flag on the lead vessel, the ESV Lodestar, a ship the Concord had no true equal to, fast enough to cross from Earth to the border reach in 11 days, hung along her length with null emitters and armed besides with conventional weapons that were nothing special by Concord standards, but were pointed by targeting mines that were. She carried a crew of 82, small for her size because most of what she did was handled by systems the crew watched over, rather than worked by hand. The crew was calm in the way crews get, when they have prepared for a long time, and the preparing is finally over. No bravado. No speeches. People checked their gear. People ate. People slept when they could. The Lodestar moved through the dark, with the quiet economy of a thing that knows what it is for. They gathered with the Bastion fleet, at a point 60 light years from the border, and waited, and waiting, as soldiers of every species in every age have agreed, is the hard part. The body readies itself for a thing, and then there is nothing to do with the readiness but hold it. The Concord crews watched the 12 human ships with open curiosity, and, in a few cases, poorly hidden doubt. 12 was 12. The formation they had slotted into held 140. But those close enough to see the Lodestar and her sisters on short-range sensors noticed something. The human ships held their positions with an exact, motionless precision that was unusual. No drift, no correction, as though the ships and the people in them were at perfect rest and perfect attention in the same breath. One Bastion captain sent a short note to a friend on another ship. "The human ships are very quiet," it said. The friend sent back, "Quiet is fine. I like quiet." "You know what I mean," said the first. "Yes," said the friend. "I know what you mean. Let's hope they're as good as they are quiet." 11 hours before the intercept, Annan's answer reached Vane, and it was worse than the fleet. She had run the analysis 3 times. The first result had seemed impossible. The second confirmed it. By the third, she had stopped hoping and simply written down what the numbers said. She used his name, the way she did when a thing was serious. Marcus, the boys logged something 3 years ago, around the time your survey ship caught that signal. A brief gravitational ripple, the kind a large mass makes passing at speed. It got flagged as a stray body and forgotten. I cross-referenced it against the fleet's own signature. She paused. The mass, the speed, the line it was on, they're consistent with a single large vessel. Not one of the fleet. Something separate. Something that came through this system 3 years ago, on a path that carried it into clear view of Earth. How close? Vane said. Close enough to see us plainly, with the right instruments. Close enough to run a full survey. He had known it was what she would say. He had known it from the moment he saw the shape of it. But hearing it aloud made it real in a different way. It wasn't scouting the Concord, he said. No, Annan said. Or not only that. It came here specifically. It looked at us. And whatever turned the fleet inward, Marcus, I think we turned it. I think that thing has been building a list of technological civilizations for a very long time. And 3 years ago, something it saw here told it the list was full, or the time was right, or whatever condition it had been waiting for was finally met. Vane was quiet a long moment. So it was never just the Concord. No, the Concord is in the way, but the destination is everything it ever found. Every people that crossed whatever line it was measuring, including us. The line stretched out between them, across 60 light-years of dark. Then Vane said, "Good." She paused. "Good. It means we're not bystanders," he said. "It means we're in this all the way. No careful distance, no helping from the edge. This is ours to solve as much as it is theirs." He closed the channel and sat a moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the bridge. "All hands," he said, on the ship-wide line. "We move in 11 hours. Sleep if you can. Eat something. Check your stations. We have one job tomorrow, and I want every soul on this ship ready to do it." He looked out through the forward screen at the dark, at the shape of the Bastion fleet, hung in the void around them like 140 pieces of weighting. 12 from Earth. A machine fleet of unknown size in the black ahead. He had run the numbers many times. He knew they were not comfortable. He also knew a thing 40 years had taught him, which was that numbers tell you what is there and never tell you what people will do with it. The night before the intercept, the crew of the Lodestar held a thing that was not quite a ceremony, and not quite a meal, and not quite a party, and had a little of all three in it. Someone had smuggled aboard real coffee, ground beans in a sealed tin that smelled like morning and like earth when the lid came off, and it went around and people took a cup and sat in 2s and 3s and talked about everything except the morning, places they had been, things they had eaten, people back home, the small absurdities of life in space that pile up over the years like stones at the bottom of a river. Lieutenant Sana Voss turned up with her wrist already in a light brace, having wrenched it in a drill 2 days out and said nothing until now, and told the story of the drill with several details that made it funnier than it had been, and people laughed. Vane walked through once, nodding, saying nothing because he was not the kind of commander who made speeches on the eve of a thing. He had tried that early in his career, and learned that what people wanted the night before was not inspiration, but ordinariness. The coffee, the stories, the familiar faces, that was what you carried into the hard thing. Then he went to his cabin and slept 6 hours. On the Concord ships, other rituals ran their course. The Sethari held a thing that translated roughly as a settling of intent, a quiet collective naming of what they were there to do and why. The Ilme sang, low, on frequencies you could catch if you tuned a receiver just right. The Draub sharpened things, which was mostly ceremonial now that their weapons ran on energy, but the act was old and it meant something, and they kept it. 140 ships, 30 and more traditions, every one of them a different way of saying the same sentence. Tomorrow we do the hard thing, and we are ready. And somewhere in all of it, without anyone deciding to, the Bastion Fleet and Task Force Aegis were doing the very same thing. Different shapes, different sounds, The same act underneath, getting ready, believing it was possible, deciding together that it would be done. The dock outside the ships did not prepare. It did not rest or drink coffee or sharpen anything or sing. It only came on, steady as it had been coming for however many years its program had been running. And that, when you sat with it, was the whole of the difference. The machine could not imagine what it was about to run into.
Not for want of sensors or processing, but because the thing about to happen to it was not the kind of thing a program can model.
What was about to meet it was 41 people's worth of grief and stubbornness and love, and the flat refusal, shared across every kind of body and every kind of history, to let this particular dark thing win. You cannot calculate that. You cannot optimize against it.
You can only run into it and find out.
The fleet came onto the sensors at 12 minutes past the 4th hour, ship time. It did not appear the way living things appear. Living things arrive with variation, with the small inconsistencies of crews who have been awake too long and drift a little when they think no one is watching. The fleet arrived the way a solved equation arrives, all at once, complete. One sweep, empty space. The next, the fleet, exactly where the models had placed it, at exactly the speed they had predicted, in the formation that had not shifted in months except for that one deliberate internal change. 186 ships. That was the true count, now that they were close enough to see clearly. The earlier guess of 350 had been wrong. The way distant things seen through poor instruments are wrong. Half the fleet had been hidden behind the other half. It traveled in 2 layers, in depth as well as width, a formation no living commander would choose because from most angles, it read as half the ships that were truly there. A deception.
Not a clever one, not the kind born of cunning, but the kind that comes from a program built for one function that has been performing that function long enough to have become very good at it.
On the bridge of the Lodestar, Vane saw the full count come up and said nothing. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Voss, wrist-braced, said, 186 confirmed, Admiral. Revising the strike model now. How does it change us? She worked it fast. She had a mind for numbers he had always found remarkable. Not the speed of it so much as the steadiness. The way she could hold many moving pieces at once and keep them from colliding. Emitters still work, she said. But we need wider spread to reach the second layer.
If we go in at the angles we planned, we field the front layer, but the back layer gets time to see us and respond before the field reaches it.
Can we field both at once? Only if we split. 6 ships to the front, 6 to the back, none in reserve. That thins us badly. Yes, sir. Vane thought about it for 7 seconds, and he was aware of every one of them. Do it, he said. Keep Lodestar central. I want to be able to reach either group. She began issuing the orders, and on the tactical display, the 12 human ships rearranged themselves with the same quiet exactness that had unsettled the Concord crews the day before. No visible chatter between them beyond the necessary. No correction errors. The movement of a group that has trained together long enough to read one another, the way a person reads their own hands. General Wren's voice came over the command line. Task Force Aegis, your status. Repositioning for a 2-layer approach. General. We've adjusted for a second formation. We're only now seeing. In place in 6 minutes. Confirmed. The Bastion fleet holds. The moment your field goes up, we move. Understood. The fleet did not change course. It had seen them. The sensors confirmed that. Its profile shifting slightly in the way of a thing that has begun to scan. It knew they were there. It did not slow. It did not speed. It did not shift its heading by a single degree. It came on, with the serene indifference of a thing that has already calculated what it will do, and found no reason to reconsider. That indifference was both the most frightening thing in the black and the single advantage Aegis had. A living enemy that spotted you, reacts, turns unpredictable. The machine's predictability was a lever, and Vane meant to pull it all the way. At 4 minutes out, he walked to the center of the bridge and stood there still, because 40 years had taught him that standing very still in the middle of a room told the people around you something useful. It told them that here was a person who was either not afraid or had decided not to let fear run the room. and that in the moment the two looked the same and the difference did not matter. 82 people, most of them young enough to be his children, all of them good at their work, most of them more frightened than they were showing. He thought about the speeches of his career, the long ones, the simple ones, the one or two that had landed. He thought about what this actually needed. "We are the reason this works," he said. "Not the technology, not the plan. Us. So do your jobs and trust the people beside you, and we'll be fine." That was all. It was enough. At 1 minute, the split was set. 6 ships on a line into the front layer, 6 on a converging arc that would bring them up under the back layer from below. The vertical approach Harrow had asked for at the very start. The angle that laid the formation's true depth bare. 3 ships, the lodestar among them, holding to watch and answer and reinforce. The fleet moved. Same speed, same heading. "On my mark," Vane said. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The null emitters on all 12 leading ships fired as one. The effect, Vane would say later, in the plainest and least scientific words he had, was like watching something trip. The front layer, 104 ships, each larger than the lodestar, faltered. Not stopped, not broken, tripped. The clean arithmetic of their motion stuttered. Ships that had held perfect line drifted half a degree off bearing. Drives that had run steady ran ragged for 3 seconds, then 8, then 12. The back layer hesitated. This was the part none of the models had called clearly, whether the second layer would register what was happening to the first before the field reached it. The answer was barely. The field from the 6 ships below struck the back layer about 14 seconds after the front went into disruption. And in those 14 seconds, the program running the back layer did a thing no analyst had foreseen. It sent a signal, not outward, not to anything beyond the fleet, inward, to itself, as though it were calling on some part of itself, stored somewhere else, somewhere the field could not reach, something that could restart the calculation and pick up where the fouled part had failed. Voss saw it first. "Admiral, we've got a signal from inside the fleet. Internal transmission, very strong. It's pinging toward." She stopped. "Toward where?" "I don't." She looked up. "The line runs through the fleet and keeps going. Out the back, the way they came." Vane understood at once. The program was not wholly contained in the fleet. It was calling home, to whatever had built it, wherever that was. And if the thing that had built it heard the call and answered. "Bastion fleet, now," he said on the command line. "We've got a hard limit, General. Whatever you're doing, start it now." Wren's voice came back instant and level. "Bastion fleet, advance." 140 Concord warships moved. What followed lasted 39 minutes. Afterward, when people wrote about it, and many did, in technical reports and in articles that millions read and in one very long Ilmi poem that no one entirely understood, but many found beautiful, they tried to say what 39 minutes of that kind of fighting was actually like, and most of them failed, the way all honest accounts of real violence fail, because the true thing is too fast and too loud and too strange for words to hold whole. What the record showed was this. The null field held the front layer in partial disruption through the first 20 minutes, opening the window. The Bastion fleet needed to close the distance and engage. The emitters had to be moved constantly because the program kept trying to route around them, kept pushing its recalculation out to the edges of the fleet, where the field ran thin. So the 12 human ships flew what came to be called the loop, a continuous, tight, fast pattern that kept the field sliding, just ahead of the program's attempts to slip it. It was hard flying. It was the kind of flying that needed the speed the human ships had and the Concord ships did not. The kind of piloting Earth had spent years of quiet, independent work to build. The kind of absolute trust between crewmates that only comes from training together until you no longer have to check the person beside you, because checking would only slow you down. No human ship was lost. 2 were hurt. The lodestar took a blow from a machine vessel that came out of disruption early. A glancing strike. More mass than weapon, the kind of thing that dents a hull and throws 3 people off their feet and finishes the job on Sana Voss's already braced wrist. She logged the injury and held her station. The Bastion fleet, given the window and given the time, did what it had been built across 4,000 years to do. And the knowledge that they were fighting a thing with no strategy changed everything. Against an enemy with a mind, you hold back. You read the plan. You are careful, because the enemy can surprise you.
Against a program that cannot bluff and cannot adapt and cannot invent, you advance and you do the work.
They did the work. At 39 minutes, the last active ship in the machine fleet went quiet. Not destroyed. Quiet.
The program lost coherence the way any program does when the hardware under it takes enough damage.
One moment, the fleet was a fleet. The next, it was 186 pieces of drifting debris. Some dark, some still generating power and going nowhere. All of them silent. The call the program had sent, that desperate ping into the dark toward whatever had made it, went unanswered. Whether because what it called was too far to reply in time, or because the answer was still on its way, or because nothing remained out there to answer at all. No one knew. It was the kind of question that would take years, and might never be closed. For now, the fleet was stopped. For now, that was enough. High Warden Calath watched it from the Concord command ship, 100 light-years back on a sensor feed running a heartbeat behind the truth. When the last signal from the machine fleet went out, he sat very still, with his eyes closed. Around him, the command crew was still too. Then someone said a short, flat word in Sithari that does not translate well, but means roughly, done. And the room let out its breath. Calath opened his eyes and reached for the channel. Admiral Vane. The reply came with a few seconds' delay. Warden, the fleet is gone. Yes, your people! 2 ships hurt. No dead. Several injuries, none serious. Calath was quiet a moment. I am very glad to hear that, he said, and meant it in a way far deeper and more tangled than the words could carry. We'll need to talk about the signal, Vane said. What it means, where it went, whether something is going to answer it. Yes, Calath said. We will, but not now. No, Vane said. Not now. Harrow heard on a morning she would have called a Wednesday, in the same kitchen where she had read the first message 2 months before. The words came through official channels first, a call from the director of the Office of Extrasolar Contact, who said it's over and the fleet is gone, and no human dead and several other things she heard but did not fully take in until after the call had ended. She sat at the table a while. Then she rose, pulled on her coat, and went out to the garden, because that was what she always did when she needed to think. The garden was bare and winter-brown, the beds empty and waiting for spring. The mountains stood where they always stood, dark and patient and wholly indifferent to the small human dramas at their feet. She thought about the seat, the empty chair in the great chamber with its polished plate and its quiet custodian, who came each morning to wipe the dust away. She thought about the 9 years it had sat empty, the 7 invitations, the 100-year waiting room, the moment she had said no and meant it, and the moment the galaxy had called back and said, "We need you." And this time it is different. It was different. She did not know if the new partnership would be smooth. She did not know if 41 other peoples with 4,000 years of settled habits would be easy to work beside. She suspected they would not be. She suspected there would be arguments and misreadings and moments where the gap between a people that thought in centuries and a people that thought in decades would grind in ways no one had yet pictured. But the thing that had come out of the dark had not cared about any of those differences. It had seen life and mind and technology and decided in whatever way a thing decides that does not so much decide as execute, that these should end. And the only reason they had not ended was that 41 peoples and 12 human ships had stood together in the dark and refused. That was worth something. That was worth a great deal. Calath's call came an hour later. He looked tired, she thought. Nearly 400 years old and tired the way victory makes you tired, when the relief of being on the far side of a terrible thing has not yet caught up with the exhaustion of having been inside it. Envoy Harrow, he said. Warden, congratulations. To all of us. He was quiet a moment. I owe you an apology. On behalf of the Council. The terms we offered you 9 years ago were not what we should have offered. We treated your people as something to be promoted into standing, rather than a people who already held it. That was wrong. I understood it in my head when you first explained it. I think I only understood it truly yesterday, watching your ships run that formation in the dark. And what I felt was not gratitude, exactly, though that as well. It was closer to recognition. Harrow looked at him. "We are very different from each other," she said. "I think we both know less about how different than we imagine. But I also think yesterday showed we are not incompatible, that we can do things together neither of us could do alone." "Yes," Kalath said. "I believe that too." "Then, let's start there," she said, "and work out the rest as we go." There was a question she asked him then, or he asked her, neither would later be sure, about why the fleet had been met with restraint rather than fury. Why the emitters had only fouled the drives instead of the weapons that could have burned the whole formation to slag. And the answer, once it was spoken, seemed obvious to both of them. Because the point had never been to win cruelly. The point had been to stop the thing. There was no one on those ships to punish. And a people that reaches for cruelty when it does not need to is a people that has forgotten why it fought at all. Restraint was not weakness. Restraint was the whole of the argument, made in the one language the dark could not ignore. The chair in the chamber was no longer empty. It was not filled at once. The formal process took several weeks. Documents registered, a representative named, a whole separate round of arguments back on Earth about who exactly should sit in the seat. But from the day the partnership was ratified, the chair had a different quality to it. It was empty the way a chair is empty when someone has only just stepped away from it, rather than empty the way a chair is empty when no one has ever come. The plate was still shined every morning. On the day, the first human delegate took her place at the great table. A woman named Dr. Lena Osei, an astrophysicist who had been on the team that first read the machine fleet signal and whose nomination surprised most people and then seemed obvious. The moment they thought about it, she looked around at 41 faces, of 41 peoples and 41 histories, and felt, she said afterward, the particular certainty of standing in exactly the right place. She set her hands flat on the polished stone. It was warm from the light of the twin suns. "Let's get to work," she said. The session began. Somewhere far out in the dark, beyond the border, the signal the machine fleet had sent went on outward through the void. Whether it would reach anything, no one knew. Whether anything that received it still existed to answer, no one knew. The question had been placed in a file, and the file had been given a number, and the number had been added to a list of things the newly widened Concord, 42 members now and counting, would one day have to face. There were many things on that list, and for the first time in 9 years humanity was at the table where the list was read. Not in 100 years, not after a probation, not after earning the right the way a junior earns a raise. Now, as themselves, with the voice they had always carried, and the seat they had always deserved, and the weight of what they had done, and what they were still willing to do, sitting with them at the table, like something solid that could not be ignored. The seat had been empty for 9 years. It had stayed empty because humanity bows to no one. And when at last it was filled on those exact terms, the only terms ever worth having. The galaxy had needed a long time to remember that, but it remembered now, and it would not forget again.